So this is Marianne from the Wagon Quilt Company, and today we're doing block 8 of Homegrown. I'm trying to remember what the quilt's called. And it will actually be the center block of your quilt with the birds on it. And this is one done by Annette, so we have a little sample. She's ahead of everybody. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is just a couple of stitches and maybe how to use some of the threads that we have in this block. One thing that Sue Spargo does use in this one is some silk ribbon, and this is a different color than you'll be using, but this is a beautiful purple. And silk ribbon comes in several different sizes. This is the narrower size, and then there's a little bit thicker one, but it's so soft that it needles just like any other kind of thread. The one thing you'll probably need is a little bit bigger needle, or maybe use your 18 so it has a big enough eye so you can slip your silk ribbon through it. But what you're going to do on the little leaves of this one, you should have all gotten a little packet of silk ribbon in your kit. And so that's really fun that you can use it. So I'm going to show you just a couple of ways to use the silk ribbon. On this one, you're doing a fly stitch. So I tie a knot back in the back and just do my fly stitch like I would with any kind of thread. So you can see how it just kind of squinches up into whatever shape you're going to use it, and makes a beautiful stitch, which is a little bit thicker than most of your threads. So here I've done a fly stitch. You can also do things like leaves with your ribbon. And maybe I'm gonna put this down so you can see a little bit better. So if I were going to do some kind of a leaf, I usually pull it up and then kind of straighten out the thread just a little bit. Instead of going straight down, which you can do, I try to kind of open up the thread. And what I'm going to do is actually come back into the ribbon right here. So instead of just bringing it down, can you see how I've come down into the middle of the ribbon right there? So when I pull it down, it gives just a little bit of shape, like a petal or a leaf. I could do this for a leaf, or I could do it, it would make a really pretty, see how I'm gonna flatten it out a little bit and then come down right in the middle. I could also do it like for little petals on a flower. But I think you'll find that it's pretty easy to work with. And it's not too bold, it just gives you a really fun little texture to some of the things that you're doing. So I could do it for little petals on this flower I'm doing. And basically any stitch. I probably wouldn't do wrap stitches or anything like that, but any kind of straight stitches, it's going to work just beautifully. You may not want to use a really long piece of the silk ribbon because the silk will wear out as you needle it through. So don't make your thread too long. The only problem with that is you find that you have to waste a little bit at the end. Mm-hmm. And I always hate wasting it because it's, you know, it's expensive. It's what our parents used to say, it was dear. But it does work up really nicely. So this is starting to wear just a little bit, even with the length that I had. But you can see you can do all kinds of shapes and everything with a silk ribbon. And when you get done, I would just kind of run it through the back of some of the other threads. And usually you're going to have a little piece that you can't use because you can't needle it. But that's the way you're going to use silk ribbon. And it just, you can see in Annette's sample right here how beautiful it is on the leaves. And she's just done a feather stitch here. And it just gives some texture. It's really beautiful. Okay, let's try. Some of you have done the raised cup stitch. I don't know that she's done it anywhere else in the quilt other than in this one. And the raised cup stitch is used to make these kind of little berry things here on this block. See the little orangey red ones right here that she's done? So Sue Spargo has used it kind of as a little filler to fill the space up. And I'll show you how to do this one. This is not a hard stitch, but it's really dimensional, so it'll pop out a little bit from the end, from your surface. I would try to use maybe a little bit bigger thread. If you use a really small thread, it's not going to have much dimension to it. So maybe a 5 or even a 3 you could use to give a little bit more dimension. The first thing that you're going to do with the raised cup stitch is make a little triangle just with straight stitches. And can you see my triangle there?
Oh, okay.
It's not very perfect, is it? But that's okay because it really won't make a difference. But I have 3 sides to it. Basically what I'm going to do is to two buttonhole stitches in each of these sides. And as I do that in the round, then it makes a circular stitch. So I'm going to bring my thread up just inside one of those triangles right here. And then I wrap it around. And she suggests using a tapestry needle. Thank you, Lynn. And in the instructions, she is actually doing her buttonhole stitch like this, so it forms just a little knot. There's a difference between the buttonhole and the blanket stitch. So she's using the buttonhole stitch. So you wrap it around and it actually forms a tiny knot. I will do 2 buttonholes in each of these 3 sides. So there's 2. That's 2 in each side. Then on the last side, I'm going to do 2 buttonholes. And after you've done a whole round, then you go around one more time. And instead of going into the triangle, you're going to go into the loop on the edge of the last stitch.
So you're going one time?
That I've done it one time, so I've done 2 stitches in each side of the triangle. And now I'm going to do a stitch in each of the stitches that I've already done previously. So, to me, it's really hard to distinguish what loop is what, so I just put it wherever it goes. Don't tell Sue that, okay? But see, you do form a little knot when you're doing the buttonhole. And my thread's just a tiny bit short. So I have done 6 stitches again, 2 on each side, and then I will just sink it. Basically, it just kind of looks like a knotty thing. Knotty. It's knotty. But if you want me to show you again, this one I made my triangle just a little bit bigger. And what it did is it gives me a little bit of a hole in the middle. This one, I did my triangle just a little bit smaller. So it makes more just this circular thing here. I don't know which one's better, which one's worse. Just a little different. So you can see those knots. Do you have any suggestions, those of you who have done it, for doing the raised cup?
Did mine all wrong. I only went around once. And
You went around once and it worked out beautifully, right?
Thank you. Thank you. It doesn't look like yours, and yours is beautiful.
So it also may depend on how big you want it.
These are beautiful.
So I don't think it really matters. It is one of the newer stitches in her book. It's not in the old version. So if you have an old, well, is this my new one? Yeah.
You just use a smaller thread.
I just used the small regular thread. Yeah.
Did you use an 8 or did you use a 5?
I used.
Probably an 8 because
I
they're
did.
tiny.
Yeah. I used
Because
the
they're
8.
little.
Yeah.
And these with the 3 are pretty big.
Mm.
They're probably twice, at least
The
twice the
size.
size.
And
So they're the same thing, as one's just using a bigger thread.
I keep forgetting that I have the bigger thread on some things.
And it
So
doesn't matter.
This was the smaller thread?
Uh-huh.
Is that
Just
what
the
you're
Yeah.
saying?
regular thread that I use.
And you can see the difference in the size just because of the size of the thread.
It looks like that. You know, she
Hers are little, aren't they?
Mhm.
Yeah. And part of the reason I use the bigger one is just so you can see it a little bit better when I'm doing a demo. My favorite stitch of all is the feather stitch. And the feather stitch is not one that's included in Sue Spargo's book. I did a crazy quilter. I've done a couple of crazy quilts, you know, back in the day. And the stitch I used probably the very most was the feather stitch. It's one I really enjoy doing. I actually asked Sue Spargo about why she didn't use it, you know, and she said, oh, there wasn't really any reason. She just did the other stitches. So she does use the Spanish knotted feather stitch, which is done, looks quite different than the regular feather stitch when you do it. I have done a feather stitch right here around the edge of the leaf. And so this is a single feather stitch. You could see, I just really like the light look of it. So I'm going to show you how to do a feather stitch. I'll bring my thread up, and if I had a, does anybody have a friction pen or something that I could borrow for a minute? No? I knew somebody would.
Yeah, Lynn has everything.
I know, she's so organized.
Oh, no.
Sometimes it's nice to kind of imagine some lines on whatever you're stitching, and some people will actually draw lines, and I'm not one to draw the lines unless I'm demonstrating, but they can give you a little bit of a guide. So with the regular feather stitch, I'm probably going to think of it as having 3 lines. And I think I'm going to get this thread right here so you can see it just a little bit better. This is Silk and Pearl, which is my favorite thread. It's made by the Thread Gatherer, and it's like pearl cotton, but it's made from silk. So it has just a little bit of a sheen to it. And when I'm starting the feather stitch, I'm going to start on one of these outside lines right here. So, you know, I think of this in my head as if I had drawn them, but I always don't draw them. So I bring up my thread, and then I go to the middle, put my needle in about the same place, and then up on the middle line. Everybody kind of has their own style to doing a feather stitch. What I like to do is when I'm doing it on this side, I bring my needle up just to the side of the line. You see? I didn't bring it up right in the middle. So I'm going to catch my thread and then make this little loop. Next, I'm going to come over to this line over here and back to the middle, but instead of going all the way to the middle, I like to kind of go just barely to the side of it. I wrap my thread around and pull it up, and then I'm back onto this side, so I go left, right, left, right. My needle's going to come here and then up to the middle, but I don't quite go to the middle. And I'm going to go back and forth. This is a very large feather stitch, and I did it that way so you can see it. But sometimes you do them really big, just for fun. And don't pull your thread too tight, because with the feather stitch, you want it to kind of have this roundish kind of motion rather than pulling it really tight like you would in a fly. So I would encourage you to add some feather stitch somewhere just for fun. And when I finish, I'm just going to sink my thread at the top to hold down that little fly stitch. But there's your basic fly stitch. But see how pretty it looks around the edge here? Just gives a real movement to things. And I can show you on here, when I'm doing this one, I'm going to bring my needle, remember, to the middle, but not quite to the middle. So this kind of shows you how you do it on the edge of something. When I go on the left-hand side, I'm bringing it actually up on the fabric, and so it's not going all the way to the middle. I forgot you guys are the quiet class, right? So I'm gonna sink that, and then I'll come back up right here as I start my new thread. I'll come right up here. How many of you have tried the feather?
I have. That's beautiful.
I've been wanting to, but I haven't.
I guess, yeah. I think the lines would make it a lot easier. I do
It
too.
would, especially as you start. But you know, I'm kind of the one who likes the imperfect stitches. I always say if I have to look really close to see if it's a machine or done by hand, then what's the sense in doing it by hand? So I like them to be just a little bit imperfect, so you know that it's done by hand.
She said she'd come up in the middle here.
Now let's try the Spanish knotted feather stitch. And I'm going to use a number 3 pearl cotton on this one. You'll be able to see it better with a bigger thread.
Did you use a number 3 thread on?
Not very much. Again, with this one, it's kind of nice to think about having 3 lines. The Spanish knotted feather stitch is not one I do a lot, so if I have to look at the book, pardon me. Once you get the hang of it, you know, it's like most of the stitches, once you start doing it, you feel okay, you feel comfortable with doing it. So I'm going to bring up my thread on the outside line like I would with a feather stitch. And then with this one, I'm going to come up in the middle, which I would do. Remember how I would do this on the regular feather. But I'm going to come out to this outer line instead. So I'm going straight across on the first one and then over to the edge or the farthest line. And then what I'm going to do, instead of just making a nice little, what would you call that? A nice little curved stitch, I'm going to actually twist it around the wrong way. So I'm going to twist it counterclockwise. And there's a twisted chain where we do that. So this is sort of partly a twisted chain that we're doing on this one. So I'm going to wrap it around like a twisted chain and then pull it through. And see how it makes what looks like a twisted chain right there.
Like that.
Okay, my next stitch, I'm going to go into this little cavity right here. So I'm going to go back to the center, but you see where it crosses? I'm going to come into that little crotch right there where it crosses.
Is this in this book?
It is, yeah. And then I'm going to come back to that outside line.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do,
Go back.
Go the opposite.
I'm going to go the opposite way so I have a twist.
Oh.
So it's looking kind of weird, isn't it?
No, I love that stitch, but I never knew how to do it.
So
Couldn't figure it out.
let me just tie this back here. Okay. So I'm going to come up in this little crotch right here. And then back up to the outside line. And I'm going to twist it like the twisted chain. So basically what you're doing is coming to the center and then to the outside. Make it a twisted chain. Get into that crotch right there and back to the outside line. Twist it.
I like it.
If I can get my needle in there and back up to this outside line. So you're going, again, like the feather, going right, then left, then right, then left. And when you're twisting this one, actually on this side, you're doing it clockwise. The other one you're doing counterclockwise. But if you don't get that twist in there, then try it again.
Work.
So it's very much just a twisted chain. Let's do one more so you can see the pattern. So it will look like this.
That. I do too. I love that stitch.
And I like it in a thicker thread.
It's pretty, isn't it?
It was totally different than
it looks very different than the regular feather stitch, doesn't it? And it's one of those where I think they did it wrong and made up a new stitch when they did. Don't you think?
I like it.
You're like, this looks good.
This this is kind of cool. Let's
Keep
let's
doing
do it
that.
again.
I'd think, now what did I do? You know.
On your block this month, you're going to do a ton of fly stitches. And as we've talked about before, if you do the fly stitch in a linear way, it will look like this across the top of the bird. And if you do them individually, it will look like this. So she has you do some this way and then some this way, if that makes any sense. But she's done a beautiful job. The fly stitch is like we did this, and I could show you.
It's a ribbon.
Yeah. You're doing a ton of fly stitches.
I always called it just a Y. It looks
A
like
Y?
to
Yeah.
me.
That's what it is. So you're thinking that it has 3 lines in here. You're coming up in the middle and then making a tail. And then you poke your needle back up in the end of that little Y. This thread kind of makes it look a little rounded. It's not quite as pointy. But you make a little tail. So there's the fly. If you're doing the fly as an individual fly, which you do on this, you notice on the outside edge of this, the fly goes all the way around the edge of the tree, of the green part. So if you're doing a fly that way, you're doing it exactly the same way, but it ends up looking very different because you do your Y like Annette mentioned. Well, not. And instead of doing them in a line, you're going to do your fly stitch side by side.
Oh, okay.
So you can see those two side by side. This one is in a line. These ones are side by side. But it is the same stitch.
I thought that's silken pearl.
I do too. Can you buy this over there?
Yeah.
You show me where it is.
We got a bunch of new colors, but you know, we unless we sell more, guys need to buy more, so we can buy more to get into the shop. You know.
I would buy more of stuff if I knew how to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
That's the
yeah.
Silken
trick.
pearl
Yeah.
makes the most beautiful bullion knots.
Oh,
is that
they're
so
just
easy to
gorgeous.
do?
That's
Yeah.
the what?
The silken pearl makes the very best bullion.
Do they sell specific?
What's that one then? Is that it?
So that's
Yes.
wrapped around a card. So are they
Oh,
two
but it's the
different?
same thing.
No.
I didn't know that.
Because it comes, the silken pearl comes in a skein like this. What I do when I buy it is I just take the little card that it comes with. Because if I leave them like this, they're just going to be a total mess. So I undo it and take the knot out. And if you have somebody to help you, you can have them hold your little skein, you know. And I just
Oh, you're gonna just wrap it.
wrap it around the card. And I like to do that because
I
then
want to hold it.
I can look and see what the color is,
On
and
the card.
it's still on the card. It has the name of the
Oh, that makes sense.
color and
Okay.
everything.
Yeah, that's a good
I
idea.
thought
You want
they
me
were
to
two
hold that?
different.
So here, Ned's gonna just So
I've also put them
That's where you
around
get
a
your
clothespin,
husband.
but.
That's
that would
Uh-huh.
work.
And I had to actually had to hand write what's on there, but
And
this is much
Sue
better.
Spargo does have those new little things for thread that we bought over there. You can go look at them. The only problem I had with them is they're a little bit expensive. There's, I think, 5 for $20. But they work even better than this, but this is a cheap way to do it.
But that tells you what color.
It
And
does.
so if you want.
And she also has little labels that you can put on those. And we have those for sale also if you want to get them. But this is how I store all of mine, at least until now, until I get brave enough to buy some of the other ones. But it doesn't take too long to do this. It'll save you a lot of tangle.
Sorry. You're good.
The only problem with these silken pearls is because you're on a skein, you don't know which end is the part that's coming off the spool. You know how the rule is you take the end that's coming off the spool and put it into your needle?
Yeah.
And you don't know that with this because it's
I
on a
didn't know with
skein.
anything. Just
So if you're doing bullions, what you'll find is if you wrap it one way, it untwists it. And if you wrap it the other way, it stays twisted. And so I basically just have to, every time I thread it, I have to try it and see which way.
And put it back in if it is.
You're right, because I don't know of a way to know which way it's twisted.
Okay.
Is there, when you knot it, should you knot it, the one that you're threading through the needle and not?
Or, I'm okay twisting it both ways when I'm doing bullions. So I just try it and twist it that way for that whole piece of thread. You can't use a terrifically long piece because, again, it's silk and it starts to wear out. It doesn't look nearly as pretty in your bullions after it wears out a little bit.
I didn't realize it would wear out that fast.
It does. And the ribbon really starts to wear out.
For some reason, in my mind, I thought silk was really strong and durable.
Yeah, it is, but it definitely in these threads and ribbons, it starts to wear down. You'll really notice it. And sometimes it looks okay, but Annette's looks beautiful.
Yes.
Are there other stitches or things that you'd like some help on?
No, this is really
Now,
good.
one thing that I just want you to know, and Annette will feel embarrassed, but she doesn't like to do the picots.
I hate picots.
And Lynn, you want to show us yours?
Mine needs a.
I'm not a
Mine
picot.
covers
I
that
look
haircut.
horrible. I cannot do them. If I can do one carrot, I'm good. But don't give me
So
10
she's
of them
done
put in a row.
her little bullions right here. And here she's done, what are these called? Drizzles. But on this one, in the instructions, it has you do the woven picots.
Yeah, I saw.
And she says, she's like me, she said, I really don't like to do them, so I'm going to put fly stitches there.
And you did the
And
picos.
mine are different
So here
lengths.
are the beautiful picots that Lynn has done right here.
No.
But you don't have to do everything that she tells you you're supposed to do. You can change it up. I mean, is anybody going to know the difference?
No.
She probably saved 3 hours.
Yeah.
No joking.
They had 2 different greens. Did you change yours?
Well, I bought the book before Marianne started the class.
And so she started it before, so
And
this
now
one
I
will
love
be more
Marianne's
like the
class.
kit, and that one is from from her own.
And
she
so
did.
yeah.
Now you will each have a different piece because
It's big.
I can only dye several yards at a time, and so every background is going to be different.
So I'm okay then.
Yes.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
I like.
Yeah.
Because it's your own unique.
Right.
yours, yeah.
Some of them
Yeah.
are going to be a little bit more modeled than others. If you like your friends better than Trader, but they will all be just a little bit different, each of those pieces. I can use the same dye recipe and get something different each time. I am doing a dye class if anybody wants to come.
So how messy is it?
It's pretty messy.
So you have to have a separate room for your dye?
She
I
does
should.
a fabulous
Yeah.
job. You did
I
it
know she
a
does.
few years ago at her house.
You come
In
to
her
my house.
kitchen, and it was real
And you did it in your
eye-opening.
kitchen?
I would
Uh-huh.
love
And it
to
didn't
come.
stain?
Oh, it doesn't stain anything. I mean, there are chemicals, and so I clean really well. I wish I had a separate kitchen to do it. It does have a smell. My husband calls it the smell of death. You get the dying death kind of thing that's going on there.
Oh, okay, it took me a second or two. I got it.
One time
Death.
they were fixing the road. I don't know if anybody was there that day, but they were fixing the road, so the road was closed in front of my house, and I had all these ladies coming for this dyeing class, and so he went out there and he said, well, my wife's having this class on dyeing, and all these ladies need to get through the road. The guy's like, oh, it's on dyeing? He's like, yeah, you probably don't want to mess with them.
That's crazy, yeah.
That was kind of funny.
After watching it, it made me realize how expensive,
Yeah.
why it's so expensive.
Are
So
you
if you
going
wanna
to do
come-
another one? Because I have a baptism that morning
Oh,
and it made
sorry.
me mad.
I
I'll call
I
my
usually
great-grandkids and
only
tell
do
them
it like
I
once a
can't
year,
come.
but sometimes we can do it another time. I like to do it during the summer so I can open up my door and
Oh, yeah.
get some ventilation and
I know.
everything. And that's on the
I'll come
28th if you
anytime.
want to come anytime. So if you have any other questions, but thanks for joining us on the video